Господин президент, как известно, с 2019
Mr. President, in 2019, by a unanimous decision of member countries of the non-aligned movement, Azerbaijan assumed chairmanship of this international body for a period of 3 years, due to the initiatives and successful work. As you have already mentioned in response to my previous question regarding the establishment of the Baku Initiative Group, as a sign of confidence in the Republic of Azerbaijan, our chairmanship in the movement was extended for another year. What has Azerbaijan's chairmanship in such a reputable body given us, and what successes has the movement achieved over these years?
Нам это дало незаменимый опыт в руководстве.
It has given us invaluable experience in leading the largest international entity after the UN, and made us even more confident that we are on the right path, because we have always fully shared and continue to share the fundamental principles upon which the movement was created: sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence of states. And we also share the ideas that guided the founders of the movement more than 60 years ago, to be far away from major geopolitical centers, and not to take sides with anyone. So, it was essentially a movement for independence, a movement for independent politics, a movement, as I believe, that is not against the so-called global players, but for one's own choice, for one's own dignity, for the opportunity to live as people of our countries see appropriate. And we have always shared these principles, and share them now. I think that international analysts, who already know Azerbaijan better and see what we are guided by, understand perfectly well that the policy, I would not describe it as equidistance, but a friendly one. As we say in Azerbaijani, everyone must mind their own business. This is the best way of cooperation. Integration processes should be carried out voluntarily. No integration should lead to the dominance of the main integrator. We are seeing that in the EU now, as some EU countries, leaders of these countries who have great support in their own countries, become black sheep in the EU space, because their position differs from the general trend. And where are the principles of democracy? Where are the principles of equality on which this structure is supposed to be based on? If a member of the organization has a different position on some issue, why should it be discriminated, sanctioned, deprived of finances, and quite illegally, by the way? This is done in full view of the whole world. So, the masks have dropped. This is why we are always in favor of voluntary integration. But it should be reasonable, and should correspond to the interests of countries. This is why the non-aligned movement was created as an alternative, as a structure that would be independent in decision-making, especially since most of these countries experience colonialism. But as time passed, it began to degrade a little bit, and few people remembered it even internationally. When we took over chairmanship of this organization, we naturally could not be a formality leader. What did we come there for? Not just to tick a box. We came there to implement our policies. And, of course, the unanimous election of Azerbaijan and the unanimous prolongation of our chairmanship enabled us to confidently carry out this policy, because we had the mandate of 119 countries, or 120 together with us. And, naturally, we focused our attention on the issue of territorial integrity and sovereignty. This was understandably the main topic for us. But not only for us. We were able to steadily work with all the national delegations to create a new platform. Of course, we understood that we needed functional dynamics. And we also understood that some members of the organization had irreconcilable contradictions among themselves, which, in fact, prevented the movement from transforming into an organization. So, we decided to go through the process of creating structures that would create platforms. You can't do it all overnight, especially since we became chair after being a member of the movement for only 10 years. This was why we put forward a number of initiatives, and they were supported. So, we created parliamentary, youth and women's platforms, and it somehow breathed life into the movement, and we held several summits and ministerial events, especially as they coincided with COVID. Our activity against vaccine nationalism also gave both our work and the movement as a whole a new impetus. And I have to say that those were not just political statements. From a practical point of view, the World Health Organization used our database for vaccination. We were very active and vocal in opposing the countries that showed their true colors. One of these countries, for example, had for a long time also claimed some kind of moral leadership in the world, although it has no grounds for that. I am talking about Canada, but its so-called moral leadership manifested itself in the fact that they bought 5 times as many vaccines as they needed. Then they expired and were thrown away. Whereas many countries that couldn't have access to those vaccines simply lost thousands, tens of thousands of their citizens. And it wasn't even about the fact that these countries didn't have money, they just didn't have access to vaccines. And we, by the way, were also faced with the lack of access. And then I wrote a letter to the President of the People's Republic of China, by the way, in response to Mir Shahin's question. I know who I would call. So, I sent a letter to Mr. Xi Jinping with a request to allocate a vaccine quota for Azerbaijan. And I am very grateful that President Xi Jinping responded very quickly, and we were provided with 500,000 vaccines. So, we started vaccination somewhere on January 20th, earlier than many countries, which was possible thanks to the help from China. We had the money to buy, but we didn't have the capacity. Meanwhile, Canada was buying 5 times more vaccines than it needed. How were these vaccines distributed? After all, the vaccine manufacturers, other than China, are mostly Western countries. So, we all remember how they were distributed. Only to themselves, and then they threw them away. And they didn't care about the others who may die, may not die, may get sick. And this once again reveals the true face of those trying to preach democracy, equality, justice, and human rights. Deceitfulness, hypocrisy, and selfishness. This is how I would describe it. We provided financial assistance, and we simply gave some of the vaccines we then received to countries that needed them more than 80 countries. So, if we take the size of the country, Azerbaijan, its population, and potential in general, then we probably helped more than anyone else in per capita terms. And we thought it was absolutely right, because we should always help. I think that one of the factors that made our foreign policy successful is that we always helped when we were asked, and when we had an opportunity. I think it is the same in life. If there is an opportunity, we should help. If not, well, as they say, a man cannot give what he hasn't got. Today, as we conclude our chairmanship this month, we are handing it over to Uganda. We are handing over a completely different structure, and we will still be in the troika with Uganda. After Uganda, Uzbekistan will take over chairmanship. So, we will continue our activities, including in the area of fighting neo-colonialism, and, of course, as I have already said, and you have noted, the Baku Initiative Group has already received a ticket to life. No one will ever push it anywhere else, and whether we will play the leading role in the movement or not, the Baku Initiative Group is our brainchild, and as long as colonial countries do not get freedom, we will help them.
Мы будем им в этом помогать.